The story opens with a young woman named Larisa waiting for her flight at the airport. While passing the time, a pilot tries to flirt with her, but she shows no interest at all. She calmly turns him down and introduces Vladimir as her husband. Their love story began when they were still teenagers. Both of them tried to apply to their dream university, but Larisa was rejected. The disappointment shook her confidence and left her feeling lost. In that fragile moment, she wandered to the edge of a building, unsure of what to do next until Vladimir arrived just in time to comfort her and pull her away from doing something dangerous. Larisa's mother also tried to encourage her, reminding her that one failure did not define her future and suggesting that she consider applying to a local campus instead. Meanwhile, in another part of town, Vladimir had his own struggle. His mother, known for her constant nagging, often scolded him over small things like his belt. She doubted his future and questioned how a man who could not even take care of himself would ever be ready for marriage. Vladimir firmly told her to stop interfering because he had already decided that he would soon marry Larisa. Not long after, Vladimir slipped into Larisa's classroom and, in front of everyone, proposed to her on the spot. She was shocked but happy, and they left together to celebrate the moment. Even so, Larisa still carried a quiet worry about their future. They were both students with no stable income. How could they possibly build a life together? Vladimir reassured her with full confidence, saying everything would work out. They would stay in his late grandmother's apartment and work whenever they could to cover their needs. With courage and love, they eventually married and moved into the apartment. Life was far from easy. Their part-time jobs left them exhausted, constantly juggling work, studies, and the responsibilities of married life. But despite the tiredness, the simple happiness they shared made everything feel worthwhile. One day, Larisa and Vladimir had dinner with Larisa's parents. Her parents expressed concern about their finances and the honeymoon that still had not happened. Vladimir explained that they did have a plan, a simple honeymoon spent camping in the forest. Instead of supporting them, Larisa's father made fun of the idea, upsetting Vladimir enough to leave the table. Sometime later, the couple finally went on their honeymoon, traveling to Blagoveshchensk. They spent their days setting up a tent, holding hands and enjoying the peacefulness of the forest. During the trip, Larisa mentioned that they would have a son when they returned home. A few days later, just as we saw at the beginning of the film, Vladimir and Larisa continued their honeymoon trip. The flight they booked had actually been considered for delay due to technical issues, but the airport decided to proceed. The passengers, including the young couple, boarded the aircraft with no idea of the danger waiting ahead. Before takeoff, Larisa slipped off her wedding ring because it felt too tight and placed it in her bag. They also met a man who was excited to go home after being away from his wife and children for a long time. On August 24, 1981, the couple boarded a plane marked 466653. It cruised calmly above the vast landscape of eastern Russia. Everything seemed peaceful. The passengers relaxed, chatted, and looked forward to reaching their destination. But the calm shifted into disaster as the aircraft entered East Oblast about 30 minutes before landing. At more than 5,000 meters in the air, the civilian flight unknowingly crossed paths with a military aircraft on an active mission. Moments later, their plane was struck with a violent impact from another aircraft. The next thing we see is Larisa. Miraculously, she is still alive in the middle of the forest, lying among the wreckage with her body battered and weak. A sharp metal rod has pierced her leg, turning every small movement into unbearable pain. Summoning whatever strength she has left, she pulls the metal out. The shock almost overwhelms her, but she forces herself to stay conscious. She tears part of her clothing and wraps her wound tightly to stop the bleeding. Barely able to stand, she begins to move through the scattered debris, her mind clinging to the hope of finding Vladimir or anyone who might still be alive. But each step only leads to more grim discoveries. She finds the bodies of other passengers, and the emotional weight sends her collapsing back into unconsciousness. Meanwhile, authorities receive word of the crash and move quickly. A man named Knyazev is assigned to lead the investigation. He orders telegrams to be sent immediately to the victims' families so the tragic news can reach them as soon as possible. At the same time, he issues a conflicting command. Because the disaster involves a military aircraft, the case must be tightly concealed from the public. The next morning, Knyazev and 2 associates are flown into the vast taiga forest to search for the suspected crash site. At the same moment, Larisa regains consciousness again. Weak, Injured and barely able to stand, she hears the faint sound of a helicopter in the distance. Filled with desperate hope, she forces herself upright and starts stumbling toward the sound, waving and crying out for help. When the helicopter passes overhead, one of the crew members notices a figure below, but they assume she is nothing more than a camp cook and choose not to stop. As air searches continue, ground teams move deeper into the forest. During the search, a young officer stumbles upon a pilot's cap lying on the ground. Not far from it, he discovers the pilot himself, hanging from a tree branch with a thick limb impaled through his chest. The horrific sight leaves the officer frozen in shock and marks him with a trauma that will stay with him for a long time. Meanwhile, Larisa struggles her way back to the wreckage of the plane. When she reaches it, her heart pounds as she finds a large tiger standing only a short distance away, watching her, ready to strike at any moment. Just then, the sound of helicopter blades echoes through the forest. The noise scares the animal, sending it retreating into the trees and leaving Larisa behind. On the edge of despair, she sits down to gather her thoughts. Her mind drifts back to a brief conversation she heard before the crash. The pilot had mentioned they were flying west, which means she would need to go east to escape the forest. The thought reminds her of something Vladimir once taught her, a simple way to find direction in an emergency. Using that memory, she takes a needle found inside a doll, rubs it until it becomes magnetized, and sets it on water to create a makeshift compass. Now, with a direction to follow, Larisa gathers anything she can use. She fills a plastic bag with water, takes warm clothing from one of the victims to protect herself from the cold, and finds a pair of shoes sturdy enough for the long journey. With determination, she leaves the shattered remains of the plane and heads east, hoping to find help or an exit from the vast taiga. As she walks through the dense forest, every step grows heavier. Her body is weakening quickly. Without realizing it, she steps onto soft ground that suddenly gives way. She has fallen into quicksand. With what strength she has left, she grabs onto a hanging tree branch and pulls herself out little by little until she finally breaks free from the deadly trap. But the effort drains even more of her energy. She tries to keep moving, but her body can no longer support her. She collapses again, unconscious in the dark and silent woods. Elsewhere, Knyazov visits the air traffic control office to ask how the incident could have happened. The officer explains that if the civilian plane was at the correct altitude, the only possible cause would be the military aircraft changing altitude. Unsatisfied, Knyazov goes to the Air Force base to question the pilots involved. It turns out the military plane had misheard instructions, leading one of the two aircraft on duty to collide with the civilian flight. Sometime later, Larisa regains consciousness once more. Weak but determined, she forces herself to stand and continues her journey through the endless stretch of forest. Realizing she was the only one left alive, the story becomes The One. In her darkest moment, Larisa's mind drifts back to the sweet memories she once shared with Vladimir. Those moments of warmth help her gather enough strength to keep moving forward. But the journey grows even harder as she climbs a steep hillside. She loses her footing and tumbles down the slope. With what little strength she has left, she crawls slowly upward until she finally reaches the top. Before she can rest, a new threat emerges. A tiger bursts out from behind the trees and locks its gaze on her before charging. Larisa escapes only because she falls over the edge of a cliff, landing out of the animal's reach. Once she feels safe, she climbs back up and continues on. In the quiet of the forest, she comes across a suitcase belonging to one of the victims. Hoping for something that might help her survive, she forces it open. Inside, she finds nothing more than a box of matches and a few children's toys, items owned by the man she and Vladimir had spoken to before boarding the flight. She uses the matches to start a small fire for warmth, then curls beside it, hugging herself to fight off the cold. In the stillness of the night, her thoughts return to Vladimir. She remembers one of their camping trips when they pitched a tent together with so much excitement. Vladimir had mentioned he had a surprise hidden in his backpack, but as the evening grew colder, he headed out to gather firewood. He told her not to open the bag until he returned. The hours passed and Larisa started to worry. When Vladimir finally came back soaking wet, relief quickly turned into frustration. She scolded him through tears, but beneath her anger was the same deep affection. The memory feels so real that it is as if he is still sitting beside her, keeping her company through the long, cold night. The next morning, Larisa wakes up aching and exhausted, her body covered in wounds. Still, she pushes herself to continue. After a long trek, she reaches a tall cliff that overlooks a wide river. In the distance, she spots something that stands out, the nose of an aircraft. Without hesitation, she decides to reach it. The only way across is to brave the rushing water. In her battered condition, she jumps into the river. The current is strong, dragging her downstream and slamming her into rocks. Using every ounce of strength, she manages to reach the opposite bank. Once there, she walks toward the wreckage and realizes it is the military plane that had collided with theirs. Inside, she finds the body of the pilot. Nearby, she discovers a flare gun. Holding onto a spark of hope, Larisa fires it into the sky, praying someone will see it. She considers firing another shot, but doubt creeps in. From this low point in the forest, would anyone actually notice? Unsure, she keeps the flare gun and the remaining bullets and leaves the wreckage behind. Meanwhile, far from the forest, Larisa's parents can no longer sit and wait after learning about the plane crash. Her father decides to take her mother to see Dmitri, one of the officials handling the case. When they reach the border area, they run into Galaya, Vladimir's mother, who is equally desperate for answers. The three of them try to enter the military post, but they are stopped at the gate. Galaya, overwhelmed by worry, loses her patience and forces her way inside. Inside the facility, they immediately confront Dmitri, pleading for the truth about what happened to the plane, carrying their children. Dmitri remains silent, bound by orders not to share any information. In the end, he leads them to meet Knyazev. With a cold expression, Knyazev informs them that the aircraft carrying Larisa and Vladimir was involved in an accident. Galia, unable to contain her emotions, demands to see the bodies if they are truly gone. Knyazev explains that none of the bodies have been found yet, even though search efforts have been ongoing for several days. Hearing this, both Larisa's parents and Galia cling to the hope that their children might still be alive. With tears streaming down her face, Larisa's mother begs Knyazev to imagine himself in their position, losing his own child with no answers. She hands him a wedding photo of Larisa and Vladimir, asking him not to stop the search and to keep hope alive for their survival. The plea leaves Knyazev silent and visibly shaken. Dmitri then gathers the courage to ask whether anything unusual was found during the search. Knyazev calmly mentions that one of the teams had seen a woman in the forest, assuming she was just a camp cook. Dmitri quickly points out that there is no camp in that area. His response stuns Knyazev. The realization hits him that the figure they saw was likely not a random person, but one of the passengers who might still be alive. Without wasting a moment, Knyazev orders the search to continue by helicopter, focusing on the exact spot where the woman was spotted. At first, his superior refuses to allow the flight because of the late hour and the risks involved. But Knyazev insists, arguing that this is no longer just a mission, it is a matter of humanity. After a brief debate, permission is finally granted. Without delay, Knyazev and his team take off toward the vast taiga forest, hoping that this time, they will find the survivor they have been looking for. Back in the forest, Larisa continues walking with no sense of direction. Her body grows weaker by the hour, and her mind sinks deeper into despair. After days of struggling without finding a way out, she reaches her breaking point. In a moment of overwhelming hopelessness, she places a plastic bag over her head, ready to give up. But just as she is about to lose consciousness, something catches her eye above her. Hanging from the branches is a familiar object. It is Vladimir's bag. She rips the plastic away and stumbles toward it. Inside, she finds a sketchbook filled with drawings of herself. Every line and detail shows just how deeply Vladimir loved her. He had prepared the book as a special surprise during their camping trip. Tears stream down her face. The grief and longing are heavy, but the discovery sparks a small flame of hope. Believing Vladimir might still be somewhere nearby, she searches the area. Then she finds him. Vladimir is still strapped to an aircraft seat, thrown into a muddy pit, his body cold and lifeless. The sight shatters her. She climbs down to him, her heart breaking as she touches him. In her grief, she imagines him sitting there alive, speaking gently, telling her he never regretted a single day spent with her, and that every moment they shared was a gift. Her hands trembling, she slips their wedding ring back onto his finger, as if renewing the vows they once made. She leans into him, holding him close, and eventually falls asleep in his arms one last time. She wakes to the sound of a helicopter circling above. She looks at Vladimir, and the reality hits her with full force. He is gone. The pain of that moment crushes her, but the helicopter noise grows louder. She knows she must move. With a breaking heart, she leaves Vladimir behind in the pit and fights her way out. Once she reaches solid ground, she pulls out the flare gun she took from the wrecked military plane and fires her final shot into the sky. The loud crack draws the attention of the rescuers. Minutes later, the helicopter team spots her. They rush to help and tell her she has reached the border of China. Without wasting another second, they lift her into the helicopter. As they take off, Larisa looks down one more time. In her fading view of the forest below, she imagines Vladimir standing there, smiling softly and waving goodbye, proud that she survived. So the moral of the story is, sometimes love asks you to survive the very moments you wish you didn't. And the hardest goodbyes are the ones where you have to keep living for the person who can't come home with you.